find the defendant, Dalia Dippolito, guilty of solicitation to commit first-degree murder.
Oh, God!
Oh, God!
Life sentence. How I survived my wife's murder plot and put her behind bars. The Dalia Dippolito case. June 16, 2017. Mike Dippolito sat in the gallery of Courtroom 4 in West Palm Beach, Florida, watching the jury file back into the courtroom. His hands were folded in his lap, knuckles white from tension. Around him the courtroom was packed. Journalists with notepads, court watchers who'd followed this case through its many twists and turns, a few friends who'd supported him through the years. But Mike barely noticed any of them. His eyes were fixed on the 6 jurors taking their seats in the jury box. 6 people who held his future in their hand. 6 people who would decide whether Dalia Dippolito, his ex-wife, the woman who tried to have him murdered, would finally be held accountable. This was the 3rd time Mike had sat in a courtroom, waiting for a verdict. The 3rd trial. 8 years of legal battles, appeals, mistrials, and retrials. 8 years of having his attempted murder replayed on television screens across the country. 8 years of waiting for justice. The first trial, back in 2011, had seemed straightforward. The evidence was overwhelming. Video footage of Dalia meeting with someone she believed was a hitman. Audio recordings of her discussing the murder plot. Police footage of her reaction when told Mike was dead. That jury had deliberated for just 6 hours before convicting her. She'd been sentenced to 20 years in prison. Mike had thought it was over then. He'd thought he could finally move on with his life. But Dalia's attorneys had appealed, arguing that pretrial publicity had made it impossible for her to get a fair trial. In 2014, an appellate court agreed and overturned her conviction. Just like that, she was granted a new trial. The second trial, in December 2016, had been a nightmare. Despite the same overwhelming evidence, the jury had deadlocked 3/3 days. 3 jurors believed Dalia's defense that she'd been acting for a reality TV show and never genuinely intended to have Mike killed. 3 jurors believed she was guilty. The judge declared it a mistrial. Mike had walked out of that courtroom feeling crushed. How could anyone watch those videos and not see the truth? How could 3 people believe such an absurd defense? But the prosecutors hadn't given up. They'd filed to try Dalia a 3rd time. And so here they were, 6 months later, waiting for another verdict. Judge Glenn Kelly, a calm and measured presence who'd presided over all 3 trials, looked at the jury for Erson, a middle-aged man in a button-down shirt. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Kelly asked. "We have, Your Honor." Mike's heart was pounding so hard he thought the people around him might hear it. This was it. After 8 years, this was finally it. The bailiff retrieved the verdict form and handed it to Judge Kelly, who reviewed it silently. Mike tried to read the judge's expression, searching for any hint of what the verdict might be. But Judge Kelly's face revealed nothing. "The defendant will please rise," Judge Kelly said. At the defense table, Dalia Dippolito stood up. She was flanked by her attorneys, Greg Rosenfeld and Brian Claypool. She was wearing a conservative dress, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She looked smaller than Mike remembered, older, thinner, worn down by 8 years of incarceration while awaiting trial and retrial. Mike studied her face, the face he'd once loved, the face he'd woken up next to every morning during their brief 6-month marriage, the face that had smiled at him while secretly planning his death. He felt nothing when he looked at her now. No anger, no sadness, no lingering affection. Just emptiness. She was a stranger to him. A dangerous stranger who tried to erase his existence for insurance money. Judge Kelly began to read. In the Circuit Court of the 15th Judicial Circuit, in and for Palm Beach County, Florida, case number 9, CF 9000-1920, State of Florida versus Dalia Dippolito. We, the jury, find the defendant, Dalia Dippolito. Time seemed to slow down. Mike held his breath. Guilty of solicitation to commit first-degree murder, so say we all. Guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom like a thunderclap. Guilty. After 3 trials. After 8 years. After countless hours of testimony and evidence and waiting. Guilty. Mike felt his eyes burning with tears. He hadn't cried through this entire ordeal. Not when he'd first heard the recordings of Dalia plotting his death. Not when he'd watched the surveillance videos. Not even when he'd testified against her. But now, hearing that single word, he felt 8 years of pain and frustration and fear finally lifting off his shoulders. At the defense table, Dalia collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Her attorneys immediately placed comforting hands on her shoulders, but there was nothing they could do now. The jury had spoken. After deliberating for just 90 minutes, they'd unanimously agreed. Dalia Dippolito was guilty of trying to have her husband murdered. Judge Kelly thanked the jury and dismissed them. Then he turned to the attorneys. Sentencing will be scheduled for July 21st at 1:30 p.m. The defendant will remain in custody until that time. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Mike sat frozen in his seat as the courtroom began to buzz with activity. Reporters were typing frantically on their phone. Camera crews were packing up their equipment. People in the gallery were whispering to each other, processing what they'd just witnessed. Craig Williams, the assistant state attorney who'd prosecuted the case, turned around from the prosecution table and caught Mike's eye. He gave a small nod, not triumphant, just acknowledgement. They'd done it. After 3 tries, they'd finally done it. As the bailiff led Dalia out of the courtroom in handcuffs, she glanced back one last time. Her eyes swept across the gallery, and for just a second, her gaze met Mike's. He didn't look away. He wanted her to see him. He wanted her to see that he'd survived. That despite her best efforts, despite the murder plot and the hitman, and the $7,000 she'd paid to have him killed, he was still here, still breathing, still fighting. And she was the one being led away in handcuffs. Mike finally stood up on shaky legs. Friends immediately surrounded him. People who'd supported him through the years, who'd sat through the trials, who'd never doubted his story. They hugged him, congratulated him, told him how relieved they were. But Mike was barely listening. His mind was elsewhere, traveling back through the 8 years that had led to this moment. Back to the beginning. Back to August 5th, 2009, the day his world had shattered. The day he'd learned that the woman he loved wanted him dead. How did it come to this? How did a marriage that began with love and hope end with murder plots and courtroom battles? To understand that, we need to go back. Not to the beginning of Mike and Dalia's relationship, but to the beginning of this 3rd trial. Because this isn't just a story about what Dalia did. It's a story about how the justice system, flawed and frustrating as it sometimes is, can eventually get it right. It's a story about evidence, about truth, about persistence. It's a story about how Mike Dippolito survived his wife's murder plot and spent 8 years fighting to put her behind bars. And it begins not on the day of the murder plot, but in a courtroom, where prosecutors and defense attorneys prepared to battle over the truth one final time. By the time the 3rd trial began on June 7, 2017, Mike Dippolito had become something of an expert on courtroom procedure. He knew the rhythms of a trial, the way lawyers spoke in carefully calibrated tones, the way witnesses answered questions with precision, the way objections punctuated testimony like verbal punctuation marks. He'd lived through 2 trials already. He knew what to expect, but that didn't make it any easier. The morning of June 7th was humid and overcast, typical Florida summer weather. Mike arrived at the Palm Beach County Courthouse early, before the media crews had fully set up their cameras. He'd learned over the years that arriving early meant avoiding the worst of the reporters' questions, the cameras shoved in his face, the strangers asking how he felt about watching his attempted murder replayed on national television. Courtroom 4D was smaller than people might expect for such a high-profile case. Rows of wooden benches for the gallery, a jury box to the right, the judge's bench elevated at the front, and 2 tables facing the judge, one for the prosecution, one for the defense. Mike took his usual seat in the 3rd row of the gallery, directly behind the prosecution table, where Assistant State Attorney Craig Williams and his team were setting up. Williams had prosecuted all 3 trials. He was in his early 40s, with dark hair going gray at the temples, and the bearing of someone who'd spent years in courtrooms. He was methodical, thorough, And perhaps most importantly, he believed Mike's story without reservation. At the defense table sat Dalia Dippolito between her attorneys, Greg Rosenfeld and Brian Claypool. This was a new defense team, the third set of attorneys Dalia had employed across the 3 trials. Rosenfeld was a well-known criminal defense attorney in South Florida, the kind of lawyer who took on impossible cases and occasionally pulled off the impossible. Dalia was wearing a conservative blue dress, minimal makeup, her hair pulled back neatly. Her attorneys had clearly coached her on courtroom presentation. She looked demure, non-threatening, like someone's daughter or sister, not someone accused of soliciting murder. Mike stared at the back of her head and tried to remember the woman he'd fallen in love with 8 years earlier. It seemed like a lifetime ago. A different person. A different world. At 9:00 a.m., sharp, the bailiff called out, "All rise! The Circuit Court for the 15th Judicial Circuit is now in session. The Honorable Glenn Kelly presiding." Judge Kelly entered from his chambers and took his seat. He was an experienced judge, probably in his 60s, with silver hair and a calm demeanor that suggested he'd seen everything the legal system could throw at him. "Please be seated," Judge Kelly said. "Good morning, everyone. We're here in the matter of State of Florida versus Dalia Dippolito, case number 9 CF9 920. The jury has already been selected and sworn. Are both sides ready to proceed with opening statements?" "The state is ready, Your Honor," Craig Williams said, rising from his chair. "The defense is ready," Greg Rosenfeld echoed. "Very well. Mr. Williams, you may proceed." Craig Williams walked to the center of the courtroom, positioning himself so he could address both the jury and the gallery. He didn't carry any notes. He didn't need them. He'd been preparing for this moment for months. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice clear and steady. "Over the next week or so, you're going to watch several videos. These aren't dramatizations. They're not actors performing for a camera. They're real surveillance footage captured by the Boynton Beach Police Department in August 29. He paused, letting that sink in. "You're going to see Dalia Dippolito." He gestured toward the defense table. "Meeting with a man she believed was a hitman. You're going to hear her discuss how she wants her husband, Michael Dippolito, killed. You're going to hear her say, and I quote, 'I'm 5,000% sure I want him dead.'" Williams began pacing slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "You're also going to see what happened on the morning of August 5th, 29. The police, knowing about this murder plot, staged Michael Dippolito's death. They created a fake crime scene at the Dippolito's townhouse. Crime scene tape, police cars, even a coroner's van. And then they brought Dalia home from the gym and told her that her husband had been shot and killed during a break-in." He stopped pacing and looked directly at the jury. "How do you think a loving wife would react to that news? Imagine for a moment that you came home and police officers told you your spouse had been murdered. What would you do?" He let the question hang in the air. Most people would scream. They'd cry. They'd collapse. They'd demand to see the body. They'd ask who did it. They'd be overwhelmed with grief. Williams walked over to the evidence table and picked up a remote control. But that's not what Dalia Dippolito did, and you'll see it on video. When Detective Samantha Barbosa told her that Michael was dead, Dalia's first question was, "Are you sure he's dead?" He repeated it slowly. "Are you sure he's dead? Not, oh my God, no. Not who did this." Her first concern was whether the hit had been successful, whether the man she'd paid $7,000 to kill her husband had actually done the job. Williams set the remote down and returned to the center of the courtroom. "The defense is going to tell you a story. They're going to claim this was all fake, that Dalia thought she was participating in some kind of reality TV show, that she never genuinely intended to have her husband killed. They're going to ask you to believe that those videos you'll watch aren't real evidence of a real crime, but rather a performance by someone who thought she was acting." He shook his head slightly. "But I want you to ask yourselves, if Dalia thought this was all fake, why didn't she say so immediately when she was arrested? Why didn't she tell the police? Wait, this is all for a TV show. You've made a mistake. Why did she sit in an interrogation room and deny any knowledge of a murder plot instead of explaining that it was staged? Williams looked each juror in the eye. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not complicated. The evidence is clear. Dalia Dippolito solicited the murder of her husband. She paid money to have it done. She provided specific instructions on how it should happen. And if the Boynton Beach Police Department hadn't been watching, Michael Dippolito would be dead today. He walked back to the prosecution table. The state will prove beyond any reasonable doubt that Dalia Dippolito is guilty of solicitation of first-degree murder. Thank you. Williams sat down and Mike exhaled slowly. That was good. That was exactly what needed to be said. Now it was the defense's turn. Greg Rosenfeld stood and approached the jury with a very different energy than Craig Williams. Where Williams had been methodical and authoritative, Rosenfeld was conversational, almost sympathetic. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "my name is Greg Rosenfeld, and I represent Dalia Dippolito. The prosecutor just told you a story about a cold-blooded woman who wanted her husband dead. It's a compelling story. It's dramatic. But it's not the whole truth." He walked slowly along the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. "Yes, you're going to see videos. Yes, you're going to hear audio recordings. Yes, you're going to see Dalia meeting with someone and discussing a murder plot. But what the prosecutor didn't tell you is the context. He didn't tell you about Michael Dippolito's background. And he didn't tell you about what Dalia believed she was doing." Rosenfeld paused for effect. "Michael Dippolito is a convicted felon. He served time in federal prison for bank fraud. He's a man who made his living by lying and deceiving people. And in early 2009, he had an idea. He wanted to create a reality television show, something dramatic, something that would get attention, something that would make him famous." Mike felt his jaw tighten. Here it comes, he thought. The lies. "And what could be more dramatic," Rosenfeld continued, "than a wife hiring a hitman to kill her husband? What could get more attention than that?" So Michael Dippolito came up with a plan. He would stage an elaborate hoax, hire actors, work with the police, create fake scenarios, and make his wife believe it was all real. And then he'd film it and sell it as a reality show. Rosenfeld shook his head sadly. Dalia Dippolito was 26 years old when she married Michael. She was naive. She trusted him. And when he told her they were going to create this show, when he told her to play along and act like she was hiring a hitman, she believed him. She thought it was all fake. She thought it was all for television. He gestured toward Dalia, who was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking if it was fake, why didn't she say so when she was arrested? And that's a fair question. But put yourself in Dalia's shoes. She's 26 years old. She's confused. She's scared. The police are telling her this is real, but her husband told her it was fake. She doesn't know what to believe, and so she shuts down. She makes mistakes." Rosenfeld walked back toward the defense table. "Ladies and gentlemen, the burden of proof in this case is on the prosecution. They have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Dalia genuinely intended to have her husband killed. They have to prove that she knew this wasn't a TV show. They have to prove that she truly wanted Michael Dippolito dead." He turned back to the jury. "And I'm going to show you that they can't meet that burden, because Dalia Dippolito believed she was acting. She believed it was fake, and if she believed it was fake, then she didn't have the intent necessary to commit this crime." Rosenfeld returned to his seat. "Thank you for listening with an open mind." Judge Kelly looked at the clock. It was nearly noon. "We'll take a lunch recess. When we return at 1:30 p.m., the state may call its first witness. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down. As people began filing out of the courtroom, Mike sat still for a moment. He'd just heard Greg Rosenfeld tell the jury that this was all Mike's idea, that he'd manipulated Dalia, that he was the villain. It was infuriating. But it wasn't surprising. The defense had tried the same approach in the second trial, and it had worked on 3 jurors. Would it work again? Mike stood up and walked out of the courtroom, past the reporters and cameras, into the humid Florida afternoon. The trial had only just begun. The hardest parts were still to come. The prosecution's case began in earnest on the afternoon of June 8, 2017. Craig Williams stood and announced, "The state calls Mohammed Shihadeh to the stand." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Mohammed Shihadeh was the man who'd started it all, the confidential informant who'd gone to police when Dalia first approached him about finding a hitman. Without him, Mike Dippolito would likely be dead. Mohammed walked through the courtroom doors escorted by a bailiff. He was in his early 40s, Middle Eastern descent, wearing a collared shirt and slacks. He looked nervous, understandable, given that he was about to testify in a murder-for-hire trial that had national media attention. The bailiff swore him in, and he took his seat in the witness box. "Mr. Shihadeh," Craig Williams began, "can you tell the jury how you know the defendant, Dalia Dippolito?" Mohammed glanced at Dalia briefly, then looked away. "I met her in 2008. We had a romantic relationship for a brief time. It didn't work out, but we stayed in touch occasionally." "And in July 2009, did Dalia contact you?" "Yes. She called me out of the blue and asked if we could meet for coffee. She said she needed to talk to me about something important." "What did she want to talk about?" Mohammed shifted in his seat. "She said she was having problems in her marriage. She said her husband Mike was controlling and abusive. And then she asked me if I knew anyone who could help her out with the situation." "What did you understand that to mean?" "At first, I didn't understand, but she kept pushing. She said she needed someone who could take care of her husband. She asked if I knew anyone who could hurt him or kill him." The courtroom was silent, except for the scratch of reporters' pens on notepads. "What was your reaction?" Williams asked. "I was shocked. I told her I didn't know anyone like that, and I didn't want to be involved. But she kept calling me. She kept asking. She said she'd pay good money for it. She said she needed it done soon." "Did you go to the police?" "Yes. After the third or fourth conversation, I realized she was serious. This wasn't just talk. She genuinely wanted her husband dead. So I went to the Boynton Beach Police Department and told them what was happening." "And what did the police ask you to do?" "They asked me to wear a wire. They wanted to record my conversations with Dalia, so they'd have evidence of what she was planning." Williams walked over to the evidence table and picked up a small recording device. "Is this the device you wore?" Mohammed studied it. "Yes, that looks like it." "And did you record conversations with Dalia Dippolito in late July and early August 2009? "Yes, several conversations." Williams picked up a laptop and approached Judge Kelly. "Your Honor, at this time the state would like to play audio recording states Exhibit 12, which is a conversation between the witness and the defendant, recorded on July 28, 2009. "Any objection from the defense?" Judge Kelly asked. Greg Rosenfeld stood. "No objection, Your Honor. You may proceed." Williams pressed play, and Dalia's voice filled the courtroom. The audio was scratchy but clear enough. Mike could hear traffic in the background. They'd been sitting in a car, or maybe at an outdoor cafe. And then he heard Dalia's voice, the voice that had once whispered, "I love you," to him, now discussing his murder as casually as ordering lunch. "Dalia, on recording. So did you find anybody?" "Mohammed, I'm working on it. These things take time. You gotta be careful." "Dalia, I know. But I need it done soon, like within the next week or two." "Mohammed, why the rush?" "Dalia, because I can't take it anymore, Mo. He's driving me crazy. And plus, I'll finally be free. I'll be a rich widow." Mohammed's voice on the recording. "You mean the life insurance?" "Dalia, yeah. $200,000. That'll set me up for a while. I can start fresh." "Mohammed, what if you just divorced him?" Dalia, laughing. "And give up half of everything?" "No way. This is better. Quick, clean, and I get everything." The recording continued for another minute. Data discussing how she wanted it to look like a break-in, how she wanted it done when she wasn't home, so she'd have an alibi, how she wanted to make sure Mike was definitely dead before she called 911. When the recording ended, the courtroom was silent. Several jurors were staring at Dalia with undisguised disgust. Williams turned back to Mohammed. "Mr. Shihadeh, in that recording, Dalia mentioned wanting to be a rich widow. Did she ever express any remorse? Any second thoughts? No. Every time we talked, she was more determined. She kept asking when it would happen. She seemed excited about it. Excited? Yes. Like this was something she'd been planning for a while and was ready to move forward with. Williams nodded. After you recorded these conversations, what happened next? The police told me they were going to set up a sting operation. They had an undercover officer who would pose as a hitman. They asked me to introduce Dalia to him. And did you? Yes. I called Dalia and told her I'd found someone. I gave her a phone number to call. After that, the police took over. Thank you, Mr. Shahada. No further questions. Greg Rosenfeld stood for cross-examination. Mike knew what was coming. The defense would try to attack Mohammed's credibility, suggest he'd manipulated Dalia, paint him as unreliable. Mr. Shahada, Rosenfeld began, you testified that you had a romantic relationship with Dalia in 2008. When that relationship ended, were you upset? Mohammed hesitated. I mean, breakups are never fun, but were you angry at her? No, Tro. Did you want to get back together with her? No, we'd both moved on. But when she called you in 2009, you agreed to meet with her. Why? She said she needed help. I thought maybe she just needed someone to talk to. Or maybe, Rosenfeld said, walking closer to the witness stand, you saw an opportunity. An opportunity to insert yourself back into her life. An opportunity to play hero by going to the police. Objection, Williams said. Argumentative. Sustained. Mr. Rosenfeld, please ask questions. Rosenfeld nodded. Mr. Shahada, did the police pay you for your cooperation? They reimbursed me for expenses. Gas, meals, things like that. How much? I don't remember exactly. A few $100s, maybe. So you had a financial incentive to keep recording Dalia. That's not why I did it. I did it because she was planning to kill someone. But you also got attention, didn't you? You were on TV. You were interviewed by news outlets. You became somewhat famous for being the informant in this case. Mohammed's face flushed. I didn't want any of that. I just wanted to do the right thing. Rosenfeld smiled slightly. No further questions. The next witness was Detective Samantha Barbosa, the lead investigator on the case. Detective Barbosa was in her late 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent years in law enforcement. She'd been with the Boynton Beach Police Department for over 15 years and had worked dozens of major cases. Williams walked her through the investigation step by step. Detective Barbosa, when did you first become aware of this case? July 25, 2009. Mohammed Shahada came to the station and reported that Dalia Dippolito was trying to hire someone to kill her husband. What did you do? We opened an investigation immediately. We had Mr. Shahada wear a recording device during subsequent meetings with Ms. Dippolito. Once we confirmed that she was serious about the plot, we decided to conduct a sting operation. Can you explain what that entailed? We had one of our undercover officers pose as a hitman. Mr. Shahada introduced them over the phone, and then we arranged for Ms. Dippolito to meet with the undercover officer in person. Williams picked up a remote control. Detective, I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 18. Can you identify this? On the courtroom screens, surveillance footage appeared. It showed a CVS parking lot, date stamped August 4, 2009. This is surveillance video from the CVS on Gateway Boulevard in Boynton Beach. This is where Miss Dippolito met with our undercover officer. And were you monitoring this meeting? Yes. We had audio and video surveillance. We wanted to document everything she said and did. Williams pressed play. Mike had seen this video dozens of times, in police briefings, in the first trial, in the second trial, on news broadcasts, on YouTube. But it never got easier to watch. The video showed Dalia pulling into the parking lot in her white car. She parked, looked around nervously, then got out and walked toward an unmarked sedan. The undercover officer, a man named Whitey Jean, was sitting in the driver's seat. Dalia opened the passenger door and climbed in. The audio was crystal clear thanks to the wire the undercover officer was wearing. Dalia, hi. You're the guy Mo sent me to. Undercover officer. That's right. You Dalia? Dalia, yeah. Officer? So let's talk. You want somebody taken care of? Dalia. Yeah. My husband. I need him. Gone. Officer, gone. You mean dead. There was a pause. This was the moment. The moment where Dalia could have backed out, could have said no, I was just joking, could have walked away. Instead, she said, yes, dead. I need him dead. The officer asked her how sure she was. Dalia's response sent chills through the courtroom. Dalia, I'm 5,000% sure. Officer, 5,000%? That's a lot of percent. Dalia, laughing nervously, I know, but that's how sure I am. I want this done. The video continued. Dalia handed over an envelope containing $3,000 in cash. A down payment, she explained. She gave the officer a photo of Mike. She provided detailed directions to their townhouse. She explained that Mike usually went to the gym early in the morning, and that would be the best time to do it. Dalia, make it look like a break-in, like someone broke in to rob the place and he surprised them. Officer, and you'll be where? Dalia, I'll go to the gym. I'll make sure I'm there when it happens so I have an alibi. And then when I come home, I'll find him and call 911. Officer, you gonna be able to handle that? Seeing your husband dead? Dalia, I'll manage. I just need to make sure he's really dead before I call. I don't want him surviving this. The officer asked when she wanted it done. Dalia's response was immediate. Tomorrow morning, August 5th. Can you do it then? The officer confirmed he could. Dalia smiled, actually smiled and said, thank you. This is going to change everything. She got out of the car and drove away. The video ended. The courtroom was silent. Several jurors were shaking their heads in disbelief. One woman in the front row had her hand over her mouth. Williams turned to Detective Barbosa. Detective, in your experience investigating crimes, have you ever seen someone so calm and collected while arranging a murder? Objection, Rosenfeld said. Calls for speculation. Sustained. Williams rephrased. What was your reaction when you watched this video? I was struck by how matter-of-fact she was. There was no hesitation, no emotion. She was discussing her husband's murder like she was ordering a pizza. What happened after this meeting? We knew we had to move quickly. She wanted it done the next morning, so we had less than 24 hours to set up the final phase of the operation. Which was, we were going to stage Michael Dippolito's death, make it look like he'd been killed during a break-in, exactly as Dalia had requested, and then we'd bring her home and see how she reacted. Williams nodded. Let's talk about August 5th, 2009. What happened that morning? At approximately 6:00 a.m., Mr. Dippolito left his home to go to the gym. We intercepted him in the parking lot and explained what was happening. He agreed to cooperate with the sting operation. What did you do with Mr. Dippolito? We brought him to the police station and set him up in a room where he could watch video feeds of his house. We wanted him to be able to see what was happening in real time. And at the house? We staged a crime scene. We put up crime scene tape, brought in patrol cars with lights flashing, and even called in a coroner's van. We wanted it to look as realistic as possible. Why? Because we wanted to see how Dalia would react when she thought her husband was actually dead. That reaction would tell us whether she genuinely believed this was a real murder plot or whether she knew it was fake. Williams walked over to the evidence table and picked up another remote. Detective, I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 24. Can you identify this? A new video appeared on the screens. This one showed the exterior of a townhouse with police cars parked outside and yellow crime scene tape stretched across the front entrance. This is the video from August 5th, 2009, showing the staged crime scene at the Dippolito's residence. And what happened next? We sent officers to the LA Fitness gym where Dalia was working out. They approached her and told her there had been an incident at her home. They asked her to come with them. The video switched to dash cam footage from a police car. It showed Dalia getting into the back seat, asking questions. Dalia, on video. What happened? Is Mike okay? Officer, ma'am, we need you to come to the house. There's been an incident. Dalia, what kind of incident? Is he hurt? The officer didn't answer. They drove in silence. When they arrived at the townhouse, Dalia got out of the car and immediately saw the crime scene tape, the police cars, the coroner's van. Dalia, oh my God, what happened? Detective Barbosa appeared on the video, approaching Dalia with a serious expression. Detective Barbosa, Ms. Dippolito, I'm Detective Barbosa. I need to speak with you about your husband. Dalia, is he okay? What's going on? Barbosa, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but there was a break-in this morning. Your husband was shot. He didn't survive. This was the moment. The moment that would define everything. Dalia's face crumpled. She brought her hands to her face and started crying. But then, and this was what everyone always remembered, she asked a question. Dalia, are you sure he's dead? Not, oh my God, no. Not who did this. Not can I see him? Are you sure he's dead? Detective Barbosa on the video. Yes, ma'am. I'm very sure. I'm so sorry. Dalia continued crying, asking to see the body. Detective Barbosa explained that it was a crime scene and she couldn't go inside yet. Dalia asked again, are you sure he's dead? You're absolutely sure? The detective confirmed again. Dalia's crying intensified. But to Mike, watching from the gallery 8 years later, it looked performative, practiced, like someone who was crying because that's what she thought a grieving widow should do, not because she was actually grieving. The video showed police escorting Dalia to a patrol car and driving her to the police station for questioning. Williams paused the video. Detective Barbosa, what was your impression of Dalia's reaction when you told her Mike was dead? I thought it was suspicious. The first thing most people ask in that situation is what happened or who did this. They don't ask for confirmation that the person is dead. That suggested to me that she wanted to make sure the hit had been successful. What happened at the police station? We placed her in an interrogation room, and I questioned her. The entire interview was recorded. Williams pulled up another video, this one showing a small, sterile interrogation room. Dalia sat at a table across from Detective Barbosa, tissues in hand, mascara running down her face. Barbosa, Dalia, I need to ask you some questions about Mike. Did he have any enemies? Anyone who might want to hurt him? Dalia, no, I don't know. I mean, he had some legal problems in the past, but I don't think anyone wanted to kill him. Barbosa, what about you? How was your relationship with Mike? Dalia, good. We were happy. We just got married 6 months ago. I loved him. Barbosa, you loved him? But we have information that you hired someone to kill him. Dalia's eyes went wide. What? No. That's insane. I would never do that. Barbosa, we have audio recordings, Dalia. We have video of you meeting with someone you thought was a hitman. We have you paying money and giving instructions. Dalia, I don't know what you're talking about. This is crazy. At no point during the interrogation did Dalia say, this was all fake, or this was for a TV show. She simply denied everything. After about 20 minutes, Detective Barbosa left the room. When she came back, she said, Dalia, Mike's not dead. He's alive. This was a sting operation, and you're under arrest for solicitation of first-degree murder. The look on Dalia's face was one Mike would never forget. Shock, confusion, and then something that might have been relief. Relief that she hadn't actually killed anyone, or relief that maybe she could talk her way out of this. The video ended. Williams turned back to Detective Barbosa. Detective, in your professional opinion, did Dalia Dippolito believe she was hiring a real hitman to kill her husband? Absolutely. Everything about her behavior indicated she thought it was real. Thank you, Detective. No further questions. Greg Rosenfeld approached for cross-examination. Detective Barbosa, you testified that you thought Dalia's reaction seemed suspicious. But isn't it true that people react to traumatic news in different ways? That's true. Some people go into shock. Some people ask unusual questions. Some people don't react the way we'd expect. Isn't that correct? Yes. So Dalia asking, "Are you sure he's dead?" doesn't necessarily mean she hired a hitman, does it? It could just mean she was in shock. It could, but combined with all the other evidence, just answer the question, detective. Her question alone doesn't prove anything, does it? No, not in isolation. And during the interrogation, Dalia denied hiring anyone to kill her husband. Correct? Yes. She maintained her innocence. Yes. If she truly believed she'd successfully had her husband killed, wouldn't she have confessed at that point? Wouldn't she have realized the jig was up? Detective Barbosa shook her head. Most criminals deny their crimes even when confronted with evidence. That's not unusual. But it's also possible that she denied it because she genuinely didn't believe she'd done anything wrong. Because she thought it was all staged for TV. Objection, Williams said. Calls for speculation. Sustained. Rosenfeld nodded. No further questions. The prosecution spent the next 2 days presenting more evidence. They called the undercover officer who'd posed as the hitman. They called forensic accountants who showed the bank withdrawals Dalia had made to pay for the hit. They called Mike's friends and family members who testified about the marriage and Dalia's behavior in the weeks leading up to the arrest. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Dalia Dippolito had genuinely wanted her husband dead. By the end of the third day of trial, the prosecution had presented their entire case. They'd shown the videos. They'd played the audio recordings. They'd laid out a timeline of events that was impossible to dispute. Craig Williams stood and addressed Judge Kelly. Your Honor, the state rests. Judge Kelly nodded. Very well. We'll adjourn for the day. Tomorrow morning, the defense may present their case. Court is adjourned. Mike walked out of the courtroom that afternoon feeling cautiously hopeful. The evidence was overwhelming. Surely the jury could see the truth. But he'd thought that before. And he'd been wrong. Now it was the defense's turn. And Mike had no idea what they were going to say to explain away the videos the jury had just seen. Mike Dippolito had been dreading this moment for 8 years. The prosecution had rested their case late on day 5, and when Mike left the courtroom that afternoon, Craig Williams pulled him aside in the hallway. Tomorrow morning, he said quietly, you're our first witness for rebuttal. Are you ready? Mike nodded. But he wasn't ready. How could anyone be ready to sit 15 feet away from the person who tried to have them killed and answer questions about it under oath? He barely slept that night. What? He kept running through everything Craig and he had discussed during trial prep. Stick to the facts. Don't get emotional. Answer only what's asked. Look at the jury when you speak. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face on that CVS surveillance video. I'm 5,000% sure. The next morning, June 14, 2017, Mike walked into courtroom Ford, wearing a dark suit and a tie that felt like it was choking him. The gallery was packed again. Reporters, cameras, spectators who'd been following this case through 3 trials. He didn't look at any of them. He kept his eyes forward as he walked past the defense table. And there she was, Dalia Dippolito, sitting between her attorneys, wearing a conservative dress, her hair pulled back. She looked older than he remembered. Prison will do that to you. She glanced up as he passed, and for just a second, their eyes met. Mike felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no residual love. Just nothing. She was a stranger to him now. A stranger who'd tried to erase his existence for $7,000 in life insurance money, and whatever else she thought she'd get from his death. The state calls Michael Dippolito to the stand, Craig Williams announced. The bailiff held open the gate to the witness box, and Mike walked through. His legs felt heavy. The court clerk approached with a Bible, and he placed his left hand on it, raising his right. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God? I do. Mike sat down in the witness chair and looked out at the courtroom. Judge Kelly was to his left, the jury to his right. 6 people who'd been watching videos of the worst days of his life for the past week. Straight ahead was the gallery. And somewhere in those rows were journalists who'd been writing about him for nearly a decade, analyzing every detail of his failed marriage and troubled past. Craig Williams stood up and approached. He gave Mike a small, reassuring nod. Good morning, Mr. Dippolito. Good morning. Can you please state your full name for the record? Michael Stanley Dippolito. And how old are you? I'm 48. Mr. Dippolito, can you tell the jury, where were you on the morning of August 5th, 2009? And just like that, they were back there. Back to the day Mike's life exploded. Muir. Mike had spent the past week watching other people tell his story. Now, it was his turn. He explained to the jury how he'd woken up that morning in his townhouse in Boynton Beach. How Dalia had been acting strange for days, nervous, distracted, asking weird questions about his schedule. How she'd insisted he go to the gym early that morning, even though he hadn't planned to. What time did you leave the house? Craig asked. Around 6 a.m. She said she wanted me out of the house so she could clean. She was very specific about me going to that particular gym. And did you think that was unusual? Everything about her behavior those last few days was unusual. But I didn't think. Mike paused, choosing his words carefully. I didn't think she was planning to have me killed. I thought maybe she was planning a surprise party or something. I know that sounds stupid now. It doesn't sound stupid, Mr. Dippolito. It sounds like you trusted your wife. Mike nodded. I did trust her. Completely. Craig walked him through that morning step by step. How Mike had gone to LA Fitness. How Detective Barbosa had approached him in the parking lot and told him there was a plot to kill him. How he'd initially thought it was some kind of prank. What did Detective Barbosa tell you? She said my wife had hired someone to kill me. She said they had it all on tape. She said they needed me to cooperate with a sting operation to catch Dalia in the act. And what was your reaction? Mike looked at the jury. I didn't believe her. I told her she had the wrong person. There was no way Dalia would do something like that. We'd only been married 6 months. We were happy. Or at least, I thought we were happy. What did Detective Barbosa do then? She played me a recording. That moment. God, Mike would never forget that moment. Sitting in the back of an unmarked police car in a gym parking lot, listening to his wife's voice on a recording device, discussing how she wanted him dead, talking about it so casually like she was ordering takeout. I'm positive, like 5,000% sure. When you heard your wife's voice on that recording, Craig said gently, what went through your mind? Mike took a breath. I felt like I was going to throw up, like the entire world had just tilted sideways. The woman I loved, the woman I'd married, the woman sleeping next to me every night, had been planning my murder. And I had no idea. Did you agree to cooperate with the police? Yes. They explained they were going to stage my death. Make it look like I'd been killed so they could see how Dalia reacted. They needed me to stay away from the house, stay out of sight. I spent the entire day in a police station, waiting. And what were you feeling during that time? Shock. Disbelief. Terror. I kept thinking maybe there was some explanation. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. But then they showed me more recordings, more videos. And I realized she really wanted me dead. The woman I'd been sharing a bed with for 6 months had paid someone $7,000 to put a bullet in my head. Craig let that sit with the jury for a moment before continuing. Mr. Dippolito, let's talk about your relationship with the defendant. How did you meet Dalia? And so Mike told them the whole story. The version he'd told so many times it almost didn't feel real anymore. They'd met in 2008 at a Starbucks. Mike was going through a divorce from his first wife, and he was lonely. Dalia was 25, beautiful, charming, and she seemed genuinely interested in him. They started dating, and within months, they were inseparable. Did you know about her past? Craig asked. That she'd worked as an escort? Yes. She told me about it early on. She said it was something she'd done when she was younger, and that she regretted it. I didn't judge her for it. I figured everyone has a past. Did you know she'd been arrested for prostitution? Yes. And that didn't concern you. I'd been arrested myself, Mike said quietly. I'd been convicted of fraud in 2002. I served 2 years in federal prison. So I wasn't exactly in a position to judge someone else's criminal history. I thought we were both trying to move forward, trying to build a better life. Craig nodded. Let's talk about your conviction. What were you convicted of? This was the part Mike had been dreading. The part where his own past became ammunition for the defense. But Craig and he had discussed this. Get it out in the open during direct examination, so the defense can't blindside the jury with it later. I was convicted of bank fraud, Mike said. I was involved in a scheme to defraud banks using stolen identities. I'm not proud of it. I served my time, paid my restitution, and when I got out, I tried to rebuild my life. I started a real estate investment company. I was doing well. And then I met Dalia. Did Dalia know about your conviction? Yes, I told her everything. And what was her reaction? She said she didn't care. She said everyone makes mistakes. She said she loved me for who I was now, not who I'd been in the past. Mike paused. I believed her. When did you get married? April 2009. We had a small ceremony. Just a few friends and family. It was one of the happiest days of my life. And how would you describe your marriage in those first few months? Mike thought about that. It seemed good. We were building a life together. I was working, she was. He hesitated. She said she was working on getting a real estate license. She was home a lot. We talked about having kids someday. Did you have any indication that she was unhappy? No. None. If I'd known she was unhappy, if I'd known something was wrong, I would have tried to fix it. I would have suggested counseling or, I don't know. Something. Anything except what she did. Craig walked over to the evidence table and picked up a document. Mr. Dippolito, I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 47. Can you identify this? Mike looked at it. His life insurance policy. That's a life insurance policy I took out in early 2009. Who is the beneficiary? Dalia, my wife. How much was the policy worth? $200,000. And when did you take out this policy? March 2009. About a month before we got married. Did Dalia ask you to take out this policy? She suggested it. She said it was smart financial planning. She said if anything happened to me, she'd be taken care of. At the time, I thought she was just being practical. Craig nodded. Mr. Dippolito, I want to show you a video now. This is the video of your wife meeting with an undercover officer posing as a hitman on August 4th, 2009. The jury has already seen this, but I'd like you to watch it again. The courtroom lights dimmed, and the now infamous CV's video played on the screens. Mike had seen it 100 times. He'd watched it in 3 separate trials. But it never got easier. There was Dalia, walking across the parking lot, getting into the undercover officer's car, handing him $3,000 in cash, giving him a photo of Mike, giving him directions to their townhouse, explaining that she wanted it to look like a break-in gone wrong. When I call 911, I want to make sure he's dead. Mike watched the jurors watching the video. Their faces were impassive, but he could see it. The disgust, the disbelief. How could someone be so cold? When the video ended, Craig asked, Mr. Dippolito, when did you first see this video? The day it was recorded. August 4th. Detective Barbosa showed it to me while I was at the police station. And what was your reaction? Mike's voice broke slightly. I'm sorry. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. That was my wife. The woman I'd married 4 months earlier. And she was sitting in a car with a man she thought was a hitman, planning every detail of my murder. She was so calm about it. So matter of fact. Like she was ordering a pizza. Did you understand at that point that this was really happening? That your wife genuinely wanted you dead? Yes. There was no denying it anymore. She'd paid money. She'd given instructions. She'd shown him my photo. She wanted me killed, and she wanted it to happen the next morning. Craig, let that settle before asking his next question. Mr. Dippolito, the defense has argued that this was all staged, that you and Dalia were trying to create a reality show, and that she was acting. What do you say to that? Mike looked directly at Greg Rosenfeld, Dalia's attorney, then back at the jury. That's a lie, he said firmly. There was never any reality show. There was never any acting. This was a real murder plot, and if the police hadn't intervened, I'd be dead right now. Did you ever discuss creating a reality show with your wife? Never. Did you ever suggest that she pretend to hire a hitman as part of some elaborate prank or TV show? Absolutely not. Did you have any involvement in any part of this plot? None. The first I heard about any of it was when Detective Barbosa approached me in that parking lot on August 5th. Everything that happened, Dalia contacting Mohammed, Dalia meeting with the undercover cop, Dalia paying the money, I had no knowledge of any of it until the police told me. Craig nodded. Let's talk about August 5th. The morning your death was staged, where were you? I was at the Boynton Beach Police Department. They'd set me up in a room with a video feed so I could watch what was happening at my house in real time. And what did you see? I watched police officers stage a crime scene at my townhouse. They put up crime scene tape. They brought in a coroner's van. They made it look like I'd been murdered. And then, Mike paused. Then I watched Dalia come home. What was she doing when she arrived? She was at the gym. She'd gone to the same gym I was supposed to be at that morning. The police intercepted her in the parking lot and told her there'd been an incident at our home. They escorted her back to the townhouse. And you watched this happen? Yes, on a video feed. What was her reaction when she saw the crime scene? Mike closed his eyes, remembering. She seemed confused at first. She asked the officers what had happened. They told her there'd been a break-in. They said someone had been hurt. And then Detective Barbosa told her that I was dead. And how did Dalia react to the news that you, her husband of 6 months, had been murdered? This was the moment. The moment that had convinced Mike, and ultimately would convince the jury, that everything Dalia had done was real. She asked, "Are you sure he's dead?" A murmur went through the courtroom. Even though everyone had seen the video, hearing Mike say it out loud, as the man who was supposedly dead, had an impact. She didn't cry. Craig asked. Not immediately. She asked if she could see my body. They told her no, it was a crime scene. She asked if they were sure I was dead, and when they confirmed it, she started crying. But it didn't seem genuine. It seemed performative, like she was crying because she thought that's what a grieving widow should do. Did you believe her grief was real? No. I just watched her on video the day before, calmly planning my murder. Her tears that morning weren't for me. They were for herself, because she knew she'd been caught. Craig walked back to the prosecution table and consulted his notes. Mr. Dippolito, after your wife was arrested on August 5th, 2009, did you ever speak to her again? No. I never spoke to her again after that morning when I left for the gym. Did she ever try to contact you? She tried to call me from jail a few times in those first few days. I didn't take the calls. Why not? What was there to say? She'd tried to have me killed. There was nothing she could say that would make that okay. Did you attend her first trial in 2011? Yes. Every day. And the second trial in 2016? Yes. And this trial? Yes. I've been here every single day. Why? Mike looked at Dalia. She was staring down at the defense table, refusing to meet his eyes. Because I need to see this through. I need to see justice done. She tried to take my life, and even though she failed, she took something from me anyway. She took my ability to trust people. She took my peace of mind. She took my peace of mind. She took years of my life that I spent in courtrooms instead of moving forward. And I need to be here to see her held accountable for that. Craig nodded slowly. Mr. Dippolito, one final question. If the police hadn't intervened, if they hadn't discovered this plot and staged your death, what do you think would have happened? Mike didn't hesitate. I'd be dead. There's no doubt in my mind. Dalia wanted me dead. She'd paid money to make it happen. And if the police hadn't been watching Mohammed Shahada, if he hadn't come forward, I'd have been shot in my own home on the morning of August 5th, 2009. And Dalia would have collected the insurance money. And Dalia would have collected the insurance money and moved on with her life like I never existed. Thank you, Mr. Dippolito. No further questions. Craig returned to his seat, and Mike took a deep breath. Direct examination was over. Now came the hard part. Judge Kelly looked at the defense table. Mr. Rosenfeld, your witness. Greg Rosenfeld stood up, and Mike braced himself. He knew what was coming. Rosenfeld was going to attack his credibility. He was going to bring up his criminal past. He was going to try to paint Mike as the villain in this story. He walked slowly toward the witness stand, holding a legal pad. Good afternoon, Mr. Dippolito. Good afternoon. You testified that you served 2 years in federal prison for bank fraud. Is that correct? Yes. And you were convicted of using stolen identities to defraud multiple banks out of hundreds of thousands of dollars, correct? Yes. So you're a convicted felon. Yes, I am. And you're a liar. You lied to banks. You lied to victims whose identities you stole. You built a career on deception, didn't you? Mike kept his voice steady. I committed crimes, yes. I lied as part of those crimes, and I served my time for it. But you're asking this jury to believe you now. You're asking them to trust the word of a convicted fraudster. Craig stood up. Objection. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Kelly said. Mr. Rosenfeld, please ask questions, not make speeches. Rosenfeld nodded. Mr. Dippolito, when did you meet Dalia? 2008. And you knew she'd worked as an escort? Yes. You knew she'd been arrested for prostitution? Yes. Did it occur to you that perhaps you weren't the best judge of character, given your own criminal history and the fact that you were dating someone involved in illegal activities? Objection, Craig said. Relevance. Your Honor, I'm establishing the nature of their relationship, Rosenfeld argued. I'll allow it. Overruled. The witness may answer. Mike thought about the question. I don't think having a criminal history makes someone a bad judge of character. I think it makes you human. Dalia and I both had troubled pasts. I thought we were both trying to do better. I was wrong about her, but that doesn't mean I'm wrong about what happened. Rosenfeld moved on. You testified that there was never any discussion of a reality show. Is that your testimony? Yes. But you were aware that the television show Cops was filming with Boynton Beach Police Department at the time of your wife's arrest, weren't you? I learned that later, yes. And in fact, the entire sting operation, your staged death, your wife being told you were dead, her arrest, all of that was filmed by Cops and later broadcast on national television, wasn't it? I didn't know Cops was involved until after it was over. The police didn't tell me they were filming, but it was filmed. This entire case has been on television. Your wife has been on television, crying and asking if you're dead. This whole thing is played out like a reality show, hasn't it? Mike saw where he was going. He was trying to blur the lines, make the jury think that maybe Dalia's defense had some merit. It was filmed because the police department had a camera crew following them, Mike said carefully. But that doesn't mean Dalia was acting. She didn't know Cops was filming. She thought she was hiring a real hitman. The fact that cameras were there doesn't change what she did. But it does raise questions, doesn't it? About what's real and what's staged? The murder plot was real, Mike said firmly. Everything else is just noise. Rosenfeld consulted his notes. Mr. Dippolito, you testified that you and Dalia were happy in your marriage. But isn't it true that you had significant financial problems? I had some debts. Yes. You owed over $100,000 in restitution from your federal conviction, didn't you? Yes. And you were struggling to make those payments? I was managing. Isn't it true that Dalia helped you with money? That she gave you money to help pay your bills? She helped out sometimes, yes. Where did that money come from? Mike hesitated. This was another trap. Tidy. I don't know. She said she'd saved it. From her work as an escort? I don't know. So your wife, who you claim was planning to kill you for insurance money, was actually giving you money to help you pay your debts. Does that make sense? Objection, Craig said. Calls for speculation. Sustained. But the damage was done. Rosenfeld had planted a seed of doubt. Why would someone who was financially supporting Mike want to kill him? He moved on. Mr. Dippolito, Let's talk about August 5th. You testified that you watched your wife's reaction on a video feed when she was told you were dead. Is that correct? Yes. And you said you thought her grief seemed performative. Those were your words. Yes. But you were watching on a video screen, weren't you? You weren't there in person? Correct. ... So you were making a judgment about the authenticity of her emotions based on a video feed? Yes, but... And you admit you're biased in this case, don't you? You want to see your wife convicted? I want to see justice done. That's not what I asked. You want to see her convicted, don't you? Mike met his eyes. Yes, I want to see her convicted, because she tried to have me killed. Or, Rosenfeld said, because you're angry that she left you and you want revenge. Objection. Craig was on his feet. That's not a question, and there's no evidence to support that characterization. Sustained. Mr. Rosenfeld again questions, not arguments. Rosenfeld held up his hands. Withdrawn. No further questions, Your Honor. He walked back to the defense table, and Mike realized he'd been holding his breath. It was over. His testimony was done. Redirect, Mr. Williams? Judge Kelly asked. Craig stood. Briefly, Your Honor. He approached the witness stand. Mr. Dippolito, defense counsel, asked about money Dalia gave you. Did Dalia ever tell you she wanted a divorce? No. Never. Did she ever express any unhappiness in your marriage? No. Duh. If she'd wanted to leave you, she could have just left, couldn't she? Yes. She didn't need to have you killed to get out of the marriage. No. She could have just walked away. But instead, she hired someone to murder you. Yes. Craig nodded. Nothing further. The witness is excused, Judge Kelly said. Mike stood up on shaky legs and walked back through the courtroom. As he passed the defense table, he glanced one more time at Dalia. She was wiping her eyes with a tissue, playing the victim for the jury. But Mike had said what he needed to say. The truth was out there. Now, it was up to the jury to decide whether they believed it. He took his seat in the gallery and tried to slow his racing heart. One of the victim advocates leaned over and whispered, "You did great." But Mike didn't feel great. He felt exhausted. He felt raw. He'd just spent 2 hours reliving the worst experience of his life, and now he had to sit here and watch the defense try to tear it all apart. The bailiff called the next witness, and the trial moved forward. But for Mike, that testimony was the hardest thing he'd ever done. Harder than listening to the recording. Harder than watching the videos. Because for 2 hours, he'd had to sit 15 feet away from the woman who tried to kill him and explain to 6 strangers why he deserved to live. After Mike stepped down from the witness stand, he thought the worst was over. He'd testified. He'd faced Dalia. He'd told his story. But then the defense put on their case, and he realized the absurdity was just beginning. Greg Rosenfeld had spent the last week telling the jury that Dalia was innocent, that this entire murder-for-hire plot was just an elaborate act, a performance for a reality TV show that never materialized. It was a ludicrous defense, in Mike's opinion, but it had worked once before. In the second trial, 3 jurors had believed it enough to deadlock the jury 3-3, causing a mistrial. Now, in trial number 3, Rosenfeld was doubling down on the same strategy. His first witness was a man named Larry Hysek, a television producer who testified that he'd had brief discussions with Mike about possibly doing a reality show. Brief discussions. That was it. They'd talked for maybe 15 minutes at a party. Mike had mentioned he had an interesting life story. Hysek had said maybe there was something there. They'd never had any formal meetings. They'd never signed any contracts. They'd never discussed Dalia pretending to hire a hitman. But Rosenfeld spun it into something bigger. Mr. Hysek, Rosenfeld asked, in your experience as a television producer, is it common for reality shows to stage dramatic scenarios? Sure, Hysek said. Reality TV is often scripted or staged to create compelling content. And would a murder-for-hire plot be the type of dramatic scenario that might attract viewers? Objection, Craig said. Calls for speculation, and it's irrelevant. There's no evidence that any such show was in development. Your Honor, Rosenfeld argued, we're establishing that this type of scenario would be consistent with reality television production. Judge Kelly thought for a moment. I'll allow it, but move on quickly, Mr. Rosenfeld. Would such a scenario attract viewers? Rosenfeld repeated. It could, yes. Drama sells. And that was it. That was the entire foundation of the defense's case. One TV producer saying that murder-for-hire plots would make good television. Craig's cross-examination was swift and brutal. Mr. Hisek, you testified that you had discussions with Michael Dippolito about a possible reality show. When was this? I think it was early 2009. Maybe February or March. And how many meetings did you have with Mr. Dippolito? Just one conversation. At a social event. One conversation. And how long did it last? Maybe 10, 15 minutes. Did you ever meet with him again to discuss this alleged show? No. Did you ever draw up a contract? No. No. Did you ever scout locations, hire a crew, or do any actual production work? No. Ow. Did Michael Dippolito ever mention his wife Dalia during this conversation? Hisek hesitated. I don't recall. You don't recall. So for all you know, Michael Dippolito wasn't even married yet when you had this conversation? I suppose that's possible. In fact, Mr. Hisek, you never spoke to Dalia Dippolito at all, did you? No. You never discussed with her any plans to stage a murder-for-hire plot? No. Done. So you have no personal knowledge of whether Dalia Dippolito believed she was acting for a television show? No, I don't. Thank you. No further questions. Hisek was excused, and Mike watched the jury. A couple of them were taking notes. One juror, an older woman in the front row, looked skeptical. Mike hoped that was a good sign. The defense's next witness was a friend of Dalia's named Maria. Mike didn't recognize her. Apparently she'd known Dalia before they got married. Maria testified that Dalia had mentioned something about a reality show. She said Mike was working on this TV project, Maria said. She said they were going to film something dramatic. Did she say what? Rosenfeld asked. Not specifically, just that it was going to be a big surprise. On cross-examination, Craig tore that apart too. Ms. Maria, when did Dalia allegedly tell you about this reality show? I think it was sometime in the summer. 2009. Before or after she was arrested? Before, I think. You think? You're not sure? It was a long time ago. Did Dalia tell you she was planning to fake her husband's murder? No, ditto. Did she tell you she was going to meet with someone she thought was a hitman? No, doll. Did she tell you she was going to pay $7,000 to have her husband killed? No, nothing like that. So when you say she mentioned a TV project, she could have been talking about anything, couldn't she? A cooking show? A home renovation show? Anything? I guess. You're speculating about what she meant, aren't you? I'm just telling you what she said. What she said was vague and nonspecific, and you're filling in the blanks to support the defense's theory. Isn't that true? Objection, Rosenfeld said. Argumentative. Sustained. But again, Craig had made his point. The defense's witnesses had no concrete evidence of any reality show. They had vague recollections of vague conversations that could mean anything. Then came the moment Mike had been both dreading and anticipating. The defense called Dalia Dippolito to the stand. A murmur went through the courtroom. In the first trial, Dalia hadn't testified. In the second trial she had, and it had been a disaster. The jury couldn't reach a verdict, but several jurors later said they didn't find her credible. Now, in the third trial, she was taking the stand again. This was her last chance to tell her side of the story. Dalia stood up from the defense table. She was wearing a pale blue dress and minimal makeup. Her attorneys had clearly coached her on how to present herself, demure, sympathetic, non-threatening. She walked to the witness stand, was sworn in, and sat down. For the first time in 8 years, Mike was going to hear her voice in person. Greg Rosenfeld approached. Please state your name for the record. Dalia Dippolito, daughter. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. Ms. Dippolito, how old are you? I'm 34. And you're currently incarcerated at the Broward County Jail, correct? Yes. How long have you been in custody? Since August 5th, 2009. Almost 8 years. She said it like she was the victim, like she was the one who'd suffered. Rosenfeld walked her through her background, her childhood in New York, her move to Florida, her work as an escort, which she characterized as a mistake I regretted. How did you meet Michael Dippolito? Rosenfeld asked. At a Starbucks. We started talking, and he seemed nice. We started dating. Did you love him? I thought I did. At first. Mike felt his jaw tighten. Here we go. When did that change? After we got married. Things got difficult. Mike was very controlling. He wanted to know where I was all the time. He checked my phone. He monitored my bank accounts. It felt like I was suffocating. This was a lie. Mike had never controlled her. He'd given her freedom, trusted her completely. But he knew this was part of the defense strategy. Paint Mike as the abuser, make Dalia the victim. Did Mike ever discuss creating a reality show? Yes. He was obsessed with it. He wanted to be famous. He said we could make money by creating some kind of dramatic show. He said we needed a storyline that would grab people's attention. And what storyline did he suggest? He said we should stage something with me pretending to hire a hitman to kill him. He said it would be shocking and controversial, and that's what reality TV needs. Mike wanted to stand up and scream. This was insane. None of this had happened, but he forced himself to stay silent, to let the process play out. Did you believe this was real? Rosenfeld asked. Did you think you were actually hiring a hitman? No, I thought it was all fake. Mike told me he'd set everything up. He said the police were in on it, that they were going to help stage it for the cameras. He said I just needed to play along. And the meetings with Mohammed Shihada? When you asked him to help you find a hitman? Mike told me to do that. He said Mohammed was part of the act. He said Mohammed knew it was fake. And the meeting at the CVS with the undercover officer? Same thing. Mike told me where to go, what to say, how much money to bring. He said the guy I was meeting was an actor. He said the cameras would be hidden, but they'd be filming everything. Why did you say you were 5,000% sure? Because Mike told me to be dramatic. He said reality TV needs big emotions, clear statements. He said I needed to sell it. And the money you paid? $7,000 total. Where did that come from? Mike gave it to me. He said it was prop money for the show. It wasn't. It was real money. Mike's money. Money from their joint bank account. But she was spinning it, twisting it, making Mike the villain. Ms. Dippolito, Rosenfeld said gently, on the morning of August 5th, 2009, you were told that your husband had been murdered. What was going through your mind? Dalia's eyes filled with tears. I was terrified. I thought the show had gone too far. I thought something had gone wrong. When the police told me Mike was dead, I didn't know what to believe. Part of me thought maybe it was still part of the act, but part of me thought maybe something terrible had really happened. Why did you ask? Are you sure he's dead? Because I was confused. Because nothing made sense. I was trying to figure out if it was real or if it was still part of the show. And when you were arrested, why didn't you immediately tell the police it was all fake? This was the question that had always bothered Mike about her defense. If she really thought it was fake, why didn't she say so right away? I was in shock, Dalia said. I was scared. I didn't know what was happening. And then I was in jail, and my lawyers told me not to talk to anyone, and everything just spiraled out of control. Rosenfeld nodded sympathetically. Ms. Dippolito, did you ever genuinely want to harm your husband? No, never. I never wanted Mike dead. This was all his idea, his plan. And now I've been in jail for 8 years for something I didn't do. She was crying now, real tears streaming down her face. And Mike sat there in the gallery, watching this performance, and he thought, she's good. She's really good. If I didn't know the truth, I might almost believe her. But he did know the truth. He'd heard the recordings. He'd seen the videos. And there was no way those were the words and actions of someone who thought she was acting. No further questions, Rosenfeld said. Judge Kelly looked at the prosecution table. Mr. Williams? Craig stood up, and Mike saw a slight smile on his face. He'd been waiting for this. Ms. Dippolito, Craig began, you've just testified that your husband Mike set up this entire fake murder plot as part of a reality show. Is that correct? Yes. And you claim he told you the police were in on it? Yes. Which police officers told you this was fake? Dalia blinked. Mike said they were involved. I didn't ask what Mike said. I asked which police officers told you personally that this was a staged event for television. None of them told me directly, but Mike said, so no police officer ever told you this was fake? No, but, buddy. And you never spoke to any television producers about this alleged show? Mike handled all that. You never signed any contracts for a television show? No. You never saw any cameras during your meetings with Mohammed Shihada or the undercover officer? Mike said they were hidden. Convenient. So there's no evidence that you knew cameras were present? I trusted Mike. You trusted Mike. The man you claim was controlling and abusive. The man you were allegedly trying to escape from. You trusted him enough to participate in this elaborate scheme? Dalia hesitated. It's complicated. Is it? Let's talk about what you said on those recordings. You told Mohammed Shihada you wanted your husband killed. You said you'd be a rich widow. You said you wanted it done as soon as possible. Those were your words, weren't they? I was acting. Acting. And when you met with the undercover officer, you said you were 5,000% sure. That's a very specific number. Why 5,000%? I was trying to be dramatic. You were trying to be dramatic. And the $7,000 you paid, you claim that was prop money? Mike said it was for the show. Craig walked over to the evidence table and picked up a bank statement. Ms. Dippolito, I'm showing you State's Exhibit 52. This is a bank statement from your joint account with Mike. Do you see this withdrawal of $3,000 on August 4th, 2009? Yes. That's the money you paid the undercover officer, isn't it? Yes. And this earlier withdrawal of $4,000 on August 1st? That's the money you paid Mohammed Shihada? I guess so. These are real withdrawals from a real bank account. This wasn't prop money, was it? Mike said. Mike said. You keep saying Mike said, but you made these withdrawals, didn't you? You handed over the cash. You gave the instructions. You provided the photo of your husband and directions to your home. Those were all your actions, weren't they? Yes, but, and when you were arrested on August 5th, you never told the police. This is all fake. It's for a TV show, did you? I was scared. You've been in jail for 8 years, Miss Dippolito. 8 years. You've had 3 trials. You've had plenty of time to tell your story. And yet, in all that time, you've never produced a single piece of evidence that this was fake. No contracts, no emails, no text messages, no witnesses who can confirm Mike told you this was for a TV show. Nothing. Isn't that true? Dalia was crying harder now. I'm telling the truth. The truth? Let me ask you this. If your husband Mike walked through that door right now, alive and well, would you be happy to see him? She didn't answer. Miss Dippolito, would you be happy to see your husband alive? She wiped her eyes. I don't know. You don't know. Because the truth is, you wanted him dead, didn't you? You wanted the insurance money. You wanted to be free. And the only reason Mike is alive today is because the police caught you before you could go through with it. That's not true. Then explain to this jury why you never once, not during your arrest, not during your interrogation, not during your first trial, not during your second trial, why you never once provided any evidence of this alleged reality show. If it's real, where's the proof? Dalia had no answer. She sat there, crying, shaking her head. Craig let the silence hang for a moment. Then he said quietly, "No further questions." The defense rested their case that afternoon. They'd put on a total of 4 witnesses: the TV producer, the friend, Dalia, and one other person Mike barely remembered. None of them had provided any concrete evidence that this was all fake. As Mike left the courtroom that day, he felt cautiously optimistic. Dalia's testimony had been a disaster. Craig had shredded her story on cross-examination. Surely the jury could see through the lies. But Mike had been through this twice before. He'd thought the first trial was a slam dunk. Guilty verdict after just 6 hours of deliberation. He'd thought the second trial would be the same. And instead, they got a hung jury. He couldn't let himself hope too much. Not yet. Tomorrow would be closing arguments. And then, finally, the jury would decide. After 8 years, this nightmare would either end or continue. The morning of June 15, 2017, arrived with the kind of humid Florida heat that makes your shirt stick to your back before you even reach your car. Mike had barely slept. Again. He kept replaying Dalia's testimony in his mind. Her tears, her denials, her insistence that Mike had orchestrated the whole thing. What if the jury believed her? What if 3 jurors believed her, like last time? What if they ended up with another mistrial, and Mike had to go through this all over again for a 4th time? Mike couldn't do a 4th trial. He just couldn't. 8 years of his life had already been consumed by this case. 8 years of court dates, depositions, appeals, and retrials. 8 years of walking into courtrooms and watching his attempted murder play out on video screens, while strangers decided whether his ex-wife should be punished for trying to kill him. He pulled into the parking lot of the Palm Beach County Courthouse at 8:15 a.m. The news vans were already there, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Reporters clustered near the entrance, checking their phones, drinking coffee from paper cups. When they saw Mike approaching, a few called out questions. "Mike, how are you feeling today? Do you think you'll get a conviction this time? Any comment on Dalia's testimony?" Mike kept his head down and walked through the doors without responding. He'd learned early on not to talk to the media. Anything he said could be twisted, taken out of context, used against him. So he stayed silent. Inside courtroom 4D, the atmosphere was tense. The gallery was packed again. Journalists, court watchers, a few of Mike's friends who'd supported him through all 3 trials. Mike took his usual seat in the 3rd row, directly behind the prosecution table. Craig Williams was already there, reviewing his notes for closing argument. He glanced back and gave Mike a nod. "You ready?" he mouthed. Mike nodded back, as ready as he'd ever be. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, the bailiff called out, "All rise!" Judge Glenn Kelly entered and took his seat. "Please be seated. Mr. Williams, is the state ready to proceed with closing arguments?" Craig stood. "We are, Your Honor. You may proceed." Craig walked to the center of the courtroom, positioning himself so he could see both the jury and the gallery. He didn't have any notes in his hands. He didn't need them. He'd been preparing for this moment for 8 years. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice steady and clear over the past 9 days. "You've watched videos. You've listened to audio recordings. You've heard testimony from police officers, from the victim, and from the defendant herself. And through all of that, one thing has remained absolutely clear. Dalia Dippolito wanted her husband dead." He paused, letting that sink in. This is not a complicated case. It's not a case that requires you to make difficult judgments about conflicting evidence or unreliable witnesses. This is a case where the defendant's own words and actions tell you exactly what she intended to do. Craig walked over to the video screen and pressed play. Once again, the CV's parking lot video appeared. Dalia getting into the undercover officer's car, handing over cash, giving instruction. "I'm 5,000% sure." Craig let it play for 30 seconds, then paused it. 5,000% sure. That's what the defendant said when the man she believed was a hitman asked if she was certain she wanted her husband killed. Not 100%. Not "I think so." 5,000% sure. He turned back to the jury. "The defense wants you to believe this was all an act. That Dalia Dippolito was playing a role for a reality TV show that doesn't exist. That she never intended any harm to come to Michael Dippolito. That she's the victim in all of this." Craig's voice hardened. But let me ask you this. If you were acting for a television show, and you were suddenly arrested by real police officers and told that your performance had been mistaken for an actual crime, what would you do? He let the question hang. You'd immediately say, "Wait, this is all fake. This is for a TV show. You've made a mistake," wouldn't you? You wouldn't wait hours, days, weeks, months, or years to mention it. You'd say it right away. Because the moment you realize the misunderstanding, you'd want to clear it up. He pointed at the defense table. But Dalia Dippolito didn't do that. When she was arrested on August 5, 2009, she didn't say it was fake. When she was interrogated at the police station, she didn't say it was for TV. When she was charged with solicitation of first-degree murder, she didn't say it was acting. Craig began pacing slowly in front of the jury box. In fact, it wasn't until her first trial, years later, that this defense emerged. Years. Why? Because it took that long for her attorneys to come up with a story that might possibly explain away the evidence. He stopped and looked each juror in the eye. But here's the problem with that story. There's no evidence to support it. None. The defense called witnesses who vaguely remembered hearing something about a TV show, but none of them could provide specifics. None of them could produce a contract, an email, a text message, anything showing that this was a planned television production. Craig walked back to the evidence table and picked up a stack of documents. You know what we do have evidence of? Bank withdrawals? Real money. $7,000 withdrawn from the Dippolito's joint account and paid to people Dalia thought were going to kill her husband. We have audio recordings of Dalia discussing the murder plot. We have video of Dalia meeting with an undercover officer, providing him with details. He set the documents down. And we have Dalia's reaction when she was told her husband was dead. Remember that video? The police staged Michael's death. They brought Dalia back to the townhouse. They told her there had been a break-in. They told her Michael had been shot. And what did she ask? Craig's voice dropped. Are you sure he's dead? Another pause. Not, oh my God, no, not who did this. Not can I see him. Her first question was, are you sure he's dead? Because she needed confirmation. She needed to know that the plan she'd set in motion had been successful. Craig walked closer to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been a prosecutor for 15 years. I've tried dozens of murder cases. And I can tell you this, genuine grief doesn't ask for confirmation. Genuine grief doesn't question whether the death has really occurred. Genuine grief is immediate, visceral, and unmistakable. What you saw on that video was not grief, it was a woman. He returned to his position in the center of the courtroom. The defense wants you to believe that Michael Dippolito orchestrated this entire plot, that he manipulated Dalia into participating, that he's the real criminal here. But ask yourselves, if Michael Dippolito wanted to create a fake reality show about his wife hiring a hitman, why would he involve the real police? Why would he risk his wife being arrested and charged with a serious felony? Craig shook his head. It doesn't make sense, and the reason it doesn't make sense is because it's not true. The truth is simple. Dalia Dippolito wanted to be a widow. She wanted the insurance money. She wanted to be free of her husband, and she was willing to pay $7,000 to make that happen. He picked up a remote and queued up another video clip, this time from Dalia's interrogation. In it, Dalia was sitting across from Detective Barbosa, insisting she had nothing to do with any murder plot. At no point in the interrogation did she mention acting or television. Watch her body language, Craig said. Listen to her words. She's not saying, this is all a misunderstanding, it was for TV. She's denying everything. She's claiming she doesn't know anything about a murder plot. Why? Because she thought she could lie her way out of it? She didn't know the police had video evidence. She didn't know Mohammed Shihada had been wearing a wire. She thought if she just denied everything, she'd get away with it. Craig turned off the video. But she didn't get away with it. Because the evidence doesn't lie. Videos don't lie. Audio recordings don't lie. The only person who has lied throughout this entire case is Dalia Dippolito. He walked back to the jury box one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, your job is to determine whether the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Dalia Dippolito solicited the murder of her husband, Michael Dippolito. I submit to you that we have done more than that. We have proven it beyond any doubt whatsoever. The evidence is overwhelming. The defendant's own words and actions convict her. Craig's voice softened slightly. The evidence is the defendant's own. Michael Dippolito is alive today only because law enforcement intervened. If they hadn't, he'd be dead. And Dalia Dippolito would have collected the insurance money and moved on with her life. Don't let her get away with attempted murder just because the murder didn't happen. Hold her accountable. Find her guilty of solicitation of first-degree murder. Thank you. He returned to his seat, and Mike exhaled. That was perfect. That was everything he'd hoped Craig would say. Now it was the defense's turn. Greg Rosenfeld stood and approached the jury. His demeanor was completely different from Craig's, less aggressive, more sympathetic. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, I want to start by acknowledging something. This case is bizarre. The circumstances are strange. The videos are disturbing. And I understand why, at first glance, you might think this is an open and shut case. But I'm asking you to look deeper. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that things are not what they seem. He gestured toward Dalia, who was sitting at the defense table with her hands folded, looking appropriately remorseful. Dalia Dippolito has been in jail for 8 years. 8 years. She's lost her 20s, and now she's losing her 30s. She's been convicted once, had that conviction overturned, went through a second trial that ended in a mistrial, and now she's here again, fighting for her freedom. And why? Because she made a terrible mistake. She got involved with a man who manipulated her into participating. Mike felt his jaw clench. Here we go. Michael Dippolito is a convicted felon, Rosenfeld continued. He's a man who made his living by lying and defrauding people. He's a con artist, and he conned Dalia into believing they were creating a reality TV show. He told her the police were involved. He told her it was all fake. And she believed him because she loved him. Rosenfeld shook his head sadly. Was she naive? Yes. Was she foolish to trust him? Absolutely. But being naive and foolish is not a crime. Participating in what you believe is a staged television production is not a crime. And that's what Dalia believed she was doing. He walked over to the video screen. The prosecution wants you to focus on what Dalia said and did, but they don't want you to think about context. They don't want you to consider that she might have been following a script provided by her husband. They don't want you to wonder why a woman who genuinely wanted her husband dead would be so open about it, meeting in public places, talking on the phone, acting in front of cameras. Rosenfeld paused. Because that's the thing. If Dalia really wanted Michael dead, wouldn't she have been more careful? Wouldn't she have been secretive? Instead, she's talking about it openly, meeting in CVS parking lots in broad daylight, making dramatic statements like 5,000% sure. Does that sound like a real murder plot? Or does it sound like someone playing a role? Does it sound like someone playing a role? Mike wanted to scream. It sounded like someone who was arrogant enough to think she wouldn't get caught. But Rosenfeld was twisting it, making her openness sound like evidence of innocence. The prosecution says there's no evidence of a reality show, Rosenfeld continued. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because a show didn't materialize doesn't mean the plan never existed. Maybe Michael Dippolito couldn't get it off the ground. Maybe the networks weren't interested. Maybe he realized he'd gone too far and abandoned the idea. We don't know, but what we do know is that Dalia believed it was real. And belief is what matters when we're talking about intent. He looked at the jury earnestly. For Dalia to be guilty of solicitation of murder, she must have genuinely intended for her husband to be killed. If she believed this was all fake, if she believed it was acting, then she lacked the intent necessary for this crime. And without intent, there is no crime. Rosenfeld walked back toward Dalia. I'm not asking you to like Dalia Dippolito. I'm not asking you to think she made good choices. I'm asking you to consider whether the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that she genuinely wanted her husband dead. And I submit to you that they haven't. There's reasonable doubt all over this case. Doubt about her intent. Doubt about what she was told. Doubt about what she believed. He turned back to the jury. Dalia has already paid a tremendous price for her poor judgment. She's been in jail for 8 years. Her life has been destroyed. Don't compound that injustice by convicting her of a crime she didn't commit. If you have reasonable doubt, and you should, then you must find her not guilty. Thank you. Rosenfeld sat down, and Mike felt a wave of frustration wash over him. Rosenfeld had done exactly what he needed to do. Plant seeds of doubt. Make Dalia seem sympathetic. Make Mike seem like the villain. Would it work? Craig stood for his rebuttal. In Florida, the prosecution gets the last word in closing arguments, and Craig was going to use every second of it. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, Mr. Rosenfeld just spent 20 minutes trying to convince you that Dalia Dippolito is a victim, that she was manipulated, that she believed this was all fake. But let me remind you of something. You've seen the evidence. You've watched the videos. You've heard the audio recordings. And nowhere in any of that evidence does Dalia Dippolito say, "I'm doing this for a TV show." He walked toward the jury box. If she believed it was fake, she would have said so. At some point, in some recording, she would have referenced the cameras, the script, the production. But she never does. Because it wasn't fake. It was real. And she knew it. Craig's voice grew more forceful. Mr. Rosenfeld wants you to believe that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But in a criminal trial, the burden is on the state to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. It is not the defendant's job to prove innocence. But it is also not the state's job to disprove every wild theory the defense comes up with. The defense has presented a theory with zero evidence, and you cannot base reasonable doubt on pure speculation. He pointed at the video screen, where the CVS footage was frozen on an image of Dalia handing cash to the undercover officer. This is not acting. This is a woman soliciting murder. And the only reason Michael Dippolito is alive today is because that man in the car was a police officer, not a real hitman. Craig looked each juror in the eye. Don't let the defense's smokescreens distract you from the truth. Dalia Dippolito is guilty. The evidence proves it. Your verdict should reflect that. Thank you. He sat down, and Judge Kelly addressed the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you've now heard all of the evidence and all the arguments. Tomorrow morning, I will give you legal instructions, and then you will begin your deliberations. Court is adjourned until 9 a.m. June 16th, 2017. Verdict day. The next morning, Judge Kelly spent about an hour explaining the law to the jury. He defined solicitation of first-degree murder. He explained reasonable doubt. He outlined the jury's responsibilities. And then, at 10:47 a.m., the jury was escorted out of the courtroom to begin deliberation. Mike sat in the gallery with his stomach in knots. How long would they take? The first trial, they deliberated for 6 hours. The second trial, they deliberated for more than 12 hours before deadlocking. What would happen this time? The minutes crawled by. Mike couldn't sit still. He left the courtroom and paced the hallway. Other people from the trial lingered nearby, reporters, victim advocates, a few of Mike's friends. Everyone was waiting. An hour passed. Then, another. Mike tried to eat lunch but couldn't. He kept checking his phone, even though he knew the court would call when the jury reached a verdict. At 12:15 p.m., just 90 minutes after deliberations began, Mike's phone buzzed. It was a text from Craig. Verdict. Get back here. Mike's heart leapt into his throat. 90 minutes. That was fast. Was that good or bad? He ran back to the courtroom, his hands shaking. The gallery was filling up again, reporters rushing to their seats, cameramen adjusting their equipment. Mike took his spot in the third row, directly behind Craig. Craig turned around. 90-minute deliberation, he said quietly. That's usually a good sign. But with this case, Who knows? The bailiff called out, "All rise!" Judge Kelly entered. "Please be seated. I've been informed the jury has reached a verdict. Bring them in." The jury filed into the courtroom. Mike studied their faces, trying to read them. Were they looking at Dalia? Were they looking at him? He couldn't tell. Judge Kelly addressed the foreperson, a middle-aged man in a button-down shirt. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "Please hand the verdict form to the bailiff." The bailiff took the paper and handed it to Judge Kelly, who reviewed it silently. His face revealed nothing. "The defendant will please rise." Dalia stood, flanked by her attorneys. Mike could see her hands trembling. Judge Kelly read aloud. "In the Circuit Court of the 15th Judicial Circuit, in and for Palm Beach County, Florida, case number 9 CF 9920, State of Florida versus Dalia Dippolito. We, the jury, find the defendant, Dalia Dippolito, guilty of solicitation to commit first-degree murder. So I'll say we all. We all. Guilty." The word echoed in Mike's head. Guilty. After 8 years. After 3 trials. After countless hours of testimony and evidence and waiting. Guilty. Mike felt tears stinging his eyes. He hadn't cried through this entire ordeal. Not when he heard the recordings. Not when he watched the videos. Not when he testified. But now, hearing that single word, he felt the weight of 8 years lifting off his shoulders. Dalia collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Her attorneys put their hands on her shoulders, trying to comfort her. But there was no comfort to be had. She'd been convicted. Again. And this time, there would be no appeal based on jury selection or pretrial publicity. This verdict was solid. Judge Kelly thanked the jury and dismissed them. Then he turned to the attorneys. "Sentencing will be scheduled for July 21st. The defendant will remain in custody. Court is adjourned." As the bailiff led Dalia out of the courtroom, she glanced back one last time. Her eyes swept across the gallery, and for a brief second, her gaze met Mike's. And then she was gone. The 5 weeks between the verdict and sentencing were the longest 5 weeks of Mike Dippolito's life. He'd waited 8 years for justice. He'd sat through 3 trials. He'd watched his attempted murder play out on video screens dozens of times. And finally, Dalia had been convicted. But it still wasn't over. Not until sentencing. Under Florida law, solicitation of first-degree murder carries a maximum penalty of life in prison. But it's also one of those charges where judges have discretion. They can impose anywhere from a few years to life, depending on the circumstances. Mike had no idea what Judge Kelly would decide. Part of him wanted to see Dalia get the maximum, life behind bars. She'd tried to have him killed. She'd shown no remorse. She'd lied on the witness stand. She deserved to spend the rest of her life in prison. But another part of him, the part that just wanted this nightmare to end, would have been satisfied with any sentence that ensured she stayed locked up for a significant amount of time. 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Anything that made it clear that what she'd done was unacceptable. As July 21st approached, Craig Williams and Mike discussed what Mike should say at the sentencing hearing. In Florida, victims have the right to make a statement before the judge imposes a sentence. This was Mike's chance to speak directly to Judge Kelly, to tell him how Dalia's actions had affected his life. "Keep it honest," Craig advised. "Don't be vindictive. Just tell him the truth about what the last 8 years have been like." Mike spent days writing and rewriting his victim impact statement. How do you summarize 8 years of trauma in a few paragraphs? How do you explain what it's like to discover that your wife wanted you dead? How do you convey the fear, the betrayal, the constant anxiety that comes from knowing someone you loved tried to erase your existence? He did his best. On the morning of July 21st, 2017, Mike walked into courtroom Ford for what he hoped would be the last time. The gallery was packed as usual. The media had followed this case through every twist and turn, and they weren't going to miss the sentencing. Dalia was brought in wearing a jail jumpsuit. She looked smaller than Mike remembered, thinner, older, defeated. She didn't look at him. Judge Kelly entered, and the hearing began. First, the defense spoke. Greg Rosenfeld made one final plea for leniency, arguing that Dalia had already served 8 years in custody and that a shorter sentence would be appropriate. He emphasized her age. She was 34 now, and suggested that she deserved a chance at rehabilitation. "Your Honor," Rosenfeld said, "my client has been punished significantly already. She's lost her freedom, her reputation, and nearly a decade of her life. We ask the court to consider a sentence that allows her some hope of rebuilding her life in the future." Dalia herself declined to make a statement. Her attorneys advised her that anything she said could be used against her in future appeals, so she remained silent. Then it was Mike's turn. Craig nodded at him, and Mike stood up. His legs felt shaky as he walked to the podium, facing Judge Kelly. He unfolded his statement and took a deep breath. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steadier than expected. "My name is Michael Dippolito, and I'm here today to tell you about the last 8 years of my life." He looked down at his notes, then decided to speak from the heart instead. "On August 5, 2009, I woke up thinking it was going to be a normal day. I went to the gym. I planned to come home, have breakfast with my wife, and go to work. Instead, I was approached by a police detective who told me that my wife, the woman I'd married just 6 months earlier, had hired someone to kill me. And in that moment, my entire world—" He paused, gathering his thoughts. "People ask me how it feels to know that someone you loved wanted you dead. The honest answer is, I don't know how to describe it. It's not just fear, though I was terrified. It's not just anger, though I was furious. It's this deep, fundamental betrayal that changes how you see the world. After Dalia was arrested, I couldn't trust anyone. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't form relationships. Every time I met someone new, I wondered if they were lying to me. I wondered if they wanted something from me. I wondered if they'd hurt me if given the chance. Mike looked at Judge Kelly. "For 8 years I've attended court hearings. I've sat through 3 trials. I've watched videos of my wife plotting my murder over and over again. I've listened to recordings of her discussing how she'd be a rich widow. I've relived the worst day of my life more times than I can count. And through all of it, Dalia has never once said she was sorry. Not once. She's denied responsibility. She's blamed." His voice grew firmer. "Your Honor, Dalia Dippolito tried to have me murdered for $7,000. That's what she thought my life was worth. $7,000. If the police hadn't intervened, I'd be dead. And she'd have collected the insurance money and moved on. That's the realities of what happened here. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a premeditated murder plot." Mike looked at Dalia for the first time. She was staring at the table, tears running down her face. "I don't say this out of hatred. I don't even hate her anymore. Honestly, I feel nothing when I look at her. She's a stranger to me now, but I do believe she needs to be held accountable. And I believe the sentence you imposed today should reflect the seriousness of what she did. She tried to take my life, and even though she failed, she succeeded in taking away my peace, my trust, and 8 years that I'll never get." He folded his paper. "Thank you for hearing me, Your Honor. I hope you'll give me, and the community, the justice we deserve." Mike walked back to his seat, his heart pounding. That was it. He'd said everything he needed to say. Judge Kelly looked at Mike, then at Dalia, then at the attorneys. He opened a folder on his desk and reviewed it for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. "Ms. Dippolito, please stand." Dalia stood, her attorneys flanking her. Judge Kelly's voice was measured but firm. "Ms. Dippolito, I've presided over all 3 of your trials. I've reviewed the evidence extensively, and I want to be clear about something. The evidence in this case is overwhelming. The videos, the audio recordings, the testimony, all of it points to one inescapable conclusion. You solicited the murder of your husband. You did so deliberately. You did so—" He paused. "I've also considered your testimony and the defense you've presented. and I find it entirely lacking in credibility. The notion that this was all a staged event for a reality television show is unsupported by any evidence whatsoever. It's a fabrication designed to avoid responsibility for your actions. Dalia was openly sobbing now. Judge Kelly continued, "You are 34 years old. You have your whole life ahead of you. But the choices you made in 2009 have consequences. Serious consequences. You attempted to have another human being murdered. That is one of the most serious crimes a person can commit. And while I recognize that you've already served 8 years in custody, awaiting trial and retrial, that does not absolve you of the need for significant punishment." He looked down at his notes. "Therefore, it is the judgment and sentence of this court that you, Dalia Dippolito, are hereby sentenced to 16 years in the Florida Department of Corrections, with credit for time served. You will also be required to pay restitution and court costs as determined by the clerk." 16 years. Mike did the math quickly. With credit for the 8 years she'd already served, that meant she'd serve another 8 years. She'd be 42 when she was released. It wasn't life. But it was enough. It was justice. Judge Kelly banged his gavel. "This matter is concluded. The defendant is remanded to the custody of the Florida Department of Corrections. We are adjourned." The bailiff approached Dalia and placed her in handcuffs. She was still crying as they led her out of the courtroom. Her mother, who'd been sitting in the gallery, called out, "I love you, Dalia." But Dalia didn't look back. And just like that, it was over. Life after the trial. In the weeks and months after sentencing, Mike tried to rebuild his life. It wasn't easy. 8 years is a long time to have your life on hold. He'd lost his real estate business during the first trial. Clients didn't want to work with someone whose personal life was tabloid fodder. He'd burned through his savings paying legal fees and living expenses. He'd avoided relationships because he couldn't trust anyone. But slowly, Mike started to move forward. He sold the townhouse where he'd lived with Dalia. Too many bad memories. He moved to a different city, got a fresh start. He took a job in construction, nothing glamorous, but honest work that paid the bills. And he started therapy. He should have done it years earlier, but he'd been too proud, too stubborn. He thought he could handle the trauma on his own. But after the trial ended, Mike realized he needed help processing everything that had happened. The therapist he found specialized in trauma and PTSD, and she helped him understand that what he'd experienced was profound psychological abuse and betrayal. "You're not just recovering from attempted murder," she told him. "You're recovering from having someone you loved and trusted try to erase your existence. That kind of betrayal affects your ability to form relationships, to trust others, to feel safe in the world. It's going to take time." She was right. It did take time. But gradually, Mike started to feel like himself again. He reconnected with old friends he'd pushed away during the trials. He started dating again, though he was cautious. He learned to trust his instincts. And he stopped watching the news coverage of his case. He didn't need to relive it anymore. Where are they now? As of 2024, Dalia Dippolito is still incarcerated at Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida. She's serving her 16-year sentence. According to the Florida Department of Corrections website, her earliest possible release date is in 2032. She'll be 49 years old. She's filed several appeals over the years, all of which have been denied. In 2019, her attorneys petitioned the U.S. Supreme Court to review her case, arguing that the 3 trials constituted double jeopardy. The Supreme Court declined to hear the case. Her mother still maintains her innocence on social media, posting occasionally about the injustice of Dalia's conviction. But for the most part, the public has moved on. The case that once dominated headlines is now just another entry in the annals of true crime. Let's return to where this story began. June 16, 2017. Courtroom Ford, in West Palm Beach. The moment the jury foreperson stood up and said the word, "guilty." Mike Dippolito remembers every detail of that moment. The sound of Dalia's sob as she collapsed into her chair. The way sunlight streamed through the courtroom windows, casting long shadows across the floor. The feeling of relief, profound, overwhelming relief, washing over him like a wave. After 8 years, it was finally over. The woman who tried to have him killed was being held accountable. Justice had been served. But as Mike walked out of that courtroom that day, he realized something. This story isn't just about him and Dalia. It's not just about one murder plot that failed, or one trial that finally resulted in a conviction. This story is about something bigger, something that affects millions of people every year. It's about domestic violence. It's about manipulation and control. It's about the warning signs we miss and the red flags we ignore. And it's about the fact that intimate partner violence can take many forms, including attempted murder. The warning signs Mike missed. When people hear Mike's story, they often ask the same question. Didn't he see any signs? Didn't he know something was wrong? The honest answer is yes and no. Looking back with the benefit of hindsight, Mike can identify moments that should have raised red flags. Dalia's secrecy about her finances, the way she'd sometimes ask strange questions about his schedule or his whereabouts, the fact that she pushed him to take out that life insurance policy so early in their marriage. But at the time, Mike explained all of it away. He told himself she was just private about money. He told himself she was interested in his day because she loved him. He told himself the insurance policy was smart financial planning. That's what people do when they're in love, especially in the early stages of a relationship. They rationalize. They make excuses. They see what they want to see. And that's exactly what abusers and manipulators count on. Dalia didn't fit the stereotypical image of a domestic abuser. She wasn't physically violent. She didn't yell or scream. She didn't isolate Mike from his friends and family. Instead, her abuse was subtle and insidious. She manipulated him emotionally. She made him feel loved and valued while secretly planning his death. That's the thing about intimate partner violence. It's not always obvious. It doesn't always look like bruises and broken bones. Sometimes it looks like a charming, loving partner who's secretly plotting your murder. The statistics are staggering. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, nearly 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men in the United States will experience severe physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. That's millions of people. But those statistics don't capture the full picture because they focus on physical violence. They don't account for emotional abuse, financial abuse, or, as in Mike's case, attempted murder that was thwarted before it could be carried out. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimates that intimate partner homicide accounts for about 15% of all homicides in the United States. And in approximately 70% of those cases, there were warning signs, prior instances of abuse, threats, stalking that went unreported or unaddressed. 70%. That means in the majority of cases where someone is killed by an intimate partner, there were opportunities to intervene. There were moments when someone could have recognized the danger and gotten help. Mike was one of the lucky ones. The police intervened before Dalia's plan could be carried out. But how many others aren't so lucky? How many people are killed every year by partners who seem loving and normal on the surface? Why Mike's story matters. Mike has had a lot of time to think about whether he wanted to share his story publicly. For years, he tried to keep a low profile. The media coverage of his case was intense. The videos of Dalia went viral, late-night talk shows made jokes, and true crime documentaries dissected every detail of their relationship. Mike hated it. He hated having his private pain turned into public entertainment. He hated being recognized on the street. He hated the constant questions and the speculation. But he's come to realize that his story has value beyond his personal experience. If sharing what happened to him can help even one person recognize the warning signs of a dangerous relationship, then it's worth the discomfort. So here's what Mike wants people to take away from this. Trust your instincts. If something feels off in your relationship, pay attention to that feeling. Don't rationalize it away. Don't make excuses. Your gut is often right. Watch for manipulation. Abusers and manipulators are often charming and charismatic. They make you feel special. They love bomb you in the early stages of the relationship. But over time, their behavior becomes controlling. They isolate you. They make you doubt yourself. If you find yourself constantly questioning your own judgment or feeling like you're walking on eggshells, that's a red flag. Financial red flags matter. If your partner is overly interested in your finances, pushes you to make financial decisions that benefit them, or tries to get you to take out large insurance policies, be cautious. Financial abuse is a real and serious form of domestic violence. Talk to someone. If you're in a relationship that feels unhealthy or dangerous, tell someone. A friend, a family member, a therapist, a domestic violence hotline. Don't keep it to yourself. Isolation is one of the tools abusers use to maintain control. It can happen to anyone. Mike was a grown man with life experience. He'd been through a divorce. He'd served time in federal prison and rebuilt his life. He thought he was savvy enough to spot a con artist, but he didn't see it coming. Domestic violence doesn't discriminate. It can happen to anyone regardless of age, gender, education, or socioeconomic status. Resources for help. If you or someone you know is in a dangerous relationship, please reach out for help. There are resources available. National Domestic Violence Hotline. 1-800-709-7233, available 24/7. A National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, www.nche.org. The National Center for Victims of Crime, www.victimsofcrime.org. Local law enforcement. If you believe you're in immediate danger, call 911. These organizations can provide support, safety planning, and resources to help you escape a dangerous situation. The legal system isn't perfect, but it can work. One of the frustrations of Mike's case was how long it took to get justice. 8 years. 3 trials. Countless court hearings, motions, appeals. There were moments when Mike wanted to give up, when he wondered if it was worth it, when he thought, maybe I should just move on and forget about this. So here's what Mike wants people to take away from this. Trust your instincts. If something feels off in your relationship, pay attention to that feeling. Don't rationalize it away. Don't make excuses. Your gut is often right. Watch for manipulation. Abusers and manipulators are often charming and charismatic. They make you feel special. They love bomb you in the early stages of the relationship. But over time, their behavior becomes controlling. They isolate you. They make you doubt yourself. If you find yourself constantly questioning your own judgment or feeling like you're walking on eggshells, that's a red flag. Financial red flags matter. If your partner is overly interested in your finances, pushes you to make financial decisions that benefit them, or tries to get you to take out large insurance policies, be cautious. Financial abuse is a real and serious form of domestic violence. Talk to someone. If you're in a relationship that feels unhealthy or dangerous, tell someone. A friend, a family member, a therapist, a domestic violence hotline. Don't keep it to yourself. Isolation is one of the tools abusers use to maintain control. It can happen to anyone. Mike was a grown man with life experience. He'd been through a divorce. He'd served time in federal prison and rebuilt his life. He thought he was savvy enough to spot a con artist, but he didn't see it coming. Domestic violence doesn't discriminate. It can happen to anyone regardless of age, gender, education, or socioeconomic status. Resources for help. If you or someone you know is in a dangerous relationship, please reach out for help. There are resources available. National Domestic Violence Hotline. 1-800-709-7233, available 24/7. A National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, www.nche.org. The National Center for Victims of Crime, www.victimsofcrime.org. Local law enforcement. If you believe you're in immediate danger, call 911. These organizations can provide support, safety planning, and resources to help you escape a dangerous situation. The legal system isn't perfect, but it can work. One of the frustrations of Mike's case was how long it took to get justice. 8 years. 3 trials. Countless court hearings, motions, appeals. There were moments when Mike wanted to give up, when he wondered if it was worth it, when he thought, maybe I should just move on and forget about this. What Mike has learned. 8 years of trials and trauma taught Mike a lot about himself and about human nature. He learned that people are capable of terrible things, even people you love and trust. Dalia seemed like a normal person. She was charming, attractive, and affectionate. But underneath that exterior, she was capable of planning and executing a murder plot without hesitation. He learned that betrayal is one of the deepest wounds a person can experience. Physical injuries heal, but the psychological damage of having someone you love try to kill you, that takes much longer to recover from. He learned that resilience is not something you're born with. It's something you build. Mike didn't feel strong during those 8 years. He felt broken, angry, and scared. But he kept showing up. He kept going to court. He kept fighting for justice. And eventually he came out the other side. And he learned that healing is possible. It doesn't happen overnight. It requires therapy, support, time, and effort. But it is possible to rebuild your life after trauma. Mike is living proof of that. A message to Dalia. Mike doesn't know if Dalia will ever hear or read this story. She's in prison, serving her 16-year sentence, and Mike has no contact with her. But if she does somehow come across this, there's one thing Mike would want her to know. He forgives her. Not because what she did was forgivable. Not because he's forgotten what happened. But because holding on to anger and hatred only hurts him. Forgiveness is something Mike is doing for himself, not for her. He forgives her, but he will never forget. And he hopes that somewhere in that prison cell, she's finally facing the truth about what she did. He hopes she's reflecting on the choices she made and the pain she caused. And he hopes that when she's eventually released, she'll have become a better person. But that's between her and her conscience. As for Mike, he's done carrying the weight of what she did. He's moving forward with his life, and she no longer has any power over him. Final thought. If you've made it this far in Mike Dippolito's story, thank you for listening. Thank you for taking the time to understand what he went through and why it matters. Mike's not a perfect person. He's made mistakes in his life, mistakes that landed him in federal prison long before he ever met Dalia. He's not a hero. He's just someone who survived something terrible and wants to help others avoid the same fate. Domestic violence is an epidemic. It affects people of all genders, all backgrounds, all walks of life. And it thrives in silence. It thrives when victims don't speak up, when bystanders don't intervene, when society looks the other way. So this story breaks that silence. It tells Mike's story, and it asks you to pay attention to the people in your life. If you see someone in a dangerous relationship, say something. If you're in a dangerous relationship yourself, reach out for help. You deserve to be safe. You deserve to be loved without fear. And you deserve justice if someone tries to harm you. On June 16, 2017, when that jury foreperson stood up and said guilty, Mike felt something he hadn't felt in 8 years. Peace. Not happiness exactly. Not triumph. Just peace. The knowledge that the truth had been heard, that justice had been served, and that he could finally close this chapter of his life. If you're in the middle of your own nightmare right now, Mike wants you to know, peace is possible. Justice is possible. Healing is possible. Don't give up. Keep fighting. Keep showing up. Keep telling the truth. Because your life is worth fighting for. Mike's was. And he's proof that you can survive even the worst betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. Thank you for hearing Mike's story. Thank you for believing survivors. And thank you for being part of the solution to ending domestic violence. If Mike's story helps even one person escape a dangerous situation or recognize the warning signs before it's too late, then every moment of those 8 years will have been worth it. Stay safe. Trust your instincts. And never forget, you are stronger than you know.